Hi, good afternoon. My name is Phil Naranjo, and I am the product manager for the Tableau Dashboards dev team.
And I'm Carolina Di Mello Souza. I'm a user experience designer on our Touch Experience team.
I feel pretty lucky to have her here. She's like one of our most talented mobile designers. It's going to make this a lot easier. Okay, so before we get started, okay, Carolina. Okay. Can I have that one?
Oh, yes.
So I've got a patch here. This is an astronaut mission patch. They wear it on their flight suits, on their space suits. It's for the last mission of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. For anybody who can tell me what we're looking at here. You can get close enough. I need an excuse to give it away. I'm not supposed to go back. Do you know what it is? VFR. VFR? Like visual flight rules? Or no? Anybody? Oh, no, BFR. Getting close. Anybody want to take a guess what we're looking at here? Yeah? For what?
Probably the feed for the shuttle.
Yeah, that's close enough. That's a good answer. So there's a patch there. So what we're looking at here is the Crew Dragon capsule. This is what SpaceX will use to ferry astronauts to the International Space Station in 2018. Those seats fold down, and the astronauts sit in front of that console. If you've been inside of a Tesla, it might look familiar to you. These long vertical panels and like spacious displays. But what I want you to notice is the kind of information that they're displaying. Those dashboards are displaying line charts and bar charts, key performance indicators for things such as guidance, navigation, propulsion systems, life support, kind of the essential information, like an analytic dashboard, if you will. What we're looking at here is a glass cockpit for NASA's Orion. This is America's next generation lunar and planetary spacecraft. Admittedly, it's not as sexy as SpaceX. It's government designed. But what you're seeing here is the astronaut on the right is looking at the propulsion system display. The center console is telling you the orientation of the spacecraft. It's a big improvement over the shuttle, which had like about 2,000 switches. One cool thing is that it actually is rather spacious if you think of the Apollo capsules. There are actually 4 other astronauts tucked into this thing. And this will fly sometime in the 2020s. Now this is how Russian, American, and European astronauts get into space today. It's a Soyuz. The Russian Space Agency says that someone my height can fit in this capsule. I think it's about like climbing sideways into a phone booth. But what you're looking at there is what they call the Neptune instrument display system. It's a similar control panel. A few things to point out that are kind of interesting about the design of this. Those little joysticks there, according to American astronauts, don't do anything. Astronauts come from pilot backgrounds. They're fighter pilots, test pilots. The Soyuz capsule is largely automated, and you're sitting on all these explosives. You need something to do with your hands while you're sitting there waiting. So the Russians, in their genius, put these fake joysticks in. The other thing that's interesting is I don't have a photo of it, but you're crammed in there in a get-me-down suit. It's like a spacesuit of sorts. And you can't actually reach the instrument panel. So use a stick to hit the touch-enabled display and interact with the controls. By the way, that guy, his name is Scott Kelly. He spent a year on the International Space Station. Anybody heard of him? And he spent a year. He came back in that Soyuz. And what's interesting about him is that he's an identical twin. When he returned to Earth, he was 2 inches taller than his twin brother. Mark Kelly, who's the commander on that patch of the last mission of the Endeavour. So if you're a spacecraft designer and you're designing an instrument display system, what do you need to think about? Well, you go offline frequently. You have bandwidth limitations. You need to display really critical information succinctly. You need to progressively display that information. And there are power limitations. It's a challenging design. And it's not unlike designing for an analytical dashboard for mobile. But unlike that spacecraft designer, we've got a feature called Device Designer that can help you design really functional, usable mobile dashboards, and armed with what Carolina is going to show you in terms of best practices, I think will put you in a good spot for creating mobile dashboards. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to learn. Today, we'll talk about these three things. For those of you who don't know what Device Designer, we'll get into that. We're going to go under the covers with how it works to give you a good foundation of how it functions. And then Carolina is going to go into general design principles around touch optimization and how you would use that with Device Designer. So, my team worked on Device Designer and released it for 10.0. It's a feature, essentially, we can design a single dashboard that can adapt itself or has adaptations that you can define for different types of screen sizes. That's it in a nutshell. Is anybody familiar with it? Has anybody used it? Got a few people here. Okay. So I wanted to tell you a little bit why we made it. Maybe the first point is a little obvious, but if you're a data-driven company, then it's probably not enough to just relegate mobile to the executive with the fancy tablet. You need to make sure that eventually this is going to happen, more people in your organization are going to need access to rich interactive dashboards, wherever they are, whatever device they're on. And so that's really sort of the reality of it. The other one is that people are already designing for mobile. And prior to Device Designer, what you would do is you design multiple dashboards, publish them, and then your end user would figure out, oh, this is the dashboard that was designed for the phone, and here's the URL for that. And then they would get access another URL for the tablet, and it would create some confusion. So we really definitely wanted to solve that problem. The other one's a little more abstract. The idea here is that we wanted to retain what you love about Tableau. So it's a tool that you can, while you're building a dashboard, you can derive insights with Tableau. You can switch easily into formatting and then go back to insights. We needed to retain that, but we wanted you to do something. And we wanted you to create a responsive dashboard. With that, we took our cue from something called responsive web design. Does anybody know what that is? Anybody heard of that? Responsive? A few people here? All right, let me see if I can press this blackout button here. And I'm going to switch over to show you something. There you go. Okay. So responsive web design is the idea that you can design a website that optimizes itself depending on the browser width. And so if that browser width simulates a device, then the way it works is that as you're resizing and approximating different devices, it'll be totally adapted and optimized so that it minimizes the amount of panning and zooming that you need in scrolling. And at the same time, we'll change content around so the navigation is really dialed in, and then the content is all viewable. And so let me show you this. I got this off of GitHub. It's like a dummy template for an analytics, like a web analytics dashboard that some kind of a web admin might use. What's really cool about it, though, is watch this. Watch as I resize this dashboard here. It's right now, I've got its size, so it about fits the entire size of my 15-inch Mac. As I start to reduce the width, you'll see something happen here. And as I approach this one point, you see everything getting squished, and let's use one, bam. Right there, we crossed a threshold called a breakpoint. And at that breakpoint, you're seeing a view of this same website, of this page optimized for a tablet. Notice that the number is on the top, wrapped. As I keep resizing, and getting it smaller, reducing the width more and more. There, we crossed over into the threshold, the breakpoint for a phone. And so with the phone, the indicators at the top take 3 rows, and it's a nice long scrolling layout, which is optimal for a phone. So if I resize again, phone, tablet, desktop. This was our inspiration. But the challenge for our team was this. We wanted you to do this, but to do this, you need to be a developer. You need to break out. This is not simple to do. And also, once you do it, you don't have a lot of freedom to kind of change and flip back into insights the way you're used to working with Tableau. So the challenge for us was to enable you to build something like this while retaining the experience for the author in Tableau. So let me pop back here and restart PowerPoint. Okay, so with that, I'm going to there we go. With that, you just saw that demo. I'm going to hand it over to Carolina, who's actually going to show you Device Designer so you can compare.
Thank you, Phil. And now that you've been in space for a little while, I am going to bring it back down to Earth and talk about something that I really enjoy, and that is wine. Okay, is anyone here from California? Oh, quite a few of you. All right. Let's take a look here. What are California's most productive and profitable wine regions? Looks like Napa. By a wide range, actually. Look at that. $5,481 return per ton. Does anyone here drink wine from Napa? Oh, wow. Okay, a lot of you. Well, you're paying the most for your California wine, and I would actually recommend that you try some of our Washington wines that are not so expensive from our home state of Washington. Okay, now I'm going to give you a quick tour of Device Designer for those of you who don't know it yet. So I'm going to, this is Tableau 10.4, by the way. And if you look over here on the left, notice this little button here, Device Preview. This is how we're going to, whoops. We're going to click on this here, and notice this bar that showed up at the top. You see we have a drop down here to select different device types, screen sizes. This is how you can flip the orientation of your layout. And then to actually customize this layout for the device that you're looking at, you have to click on this button here to add the layout. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And notice that the tablet layout was added here under the default on the left panel. The other thing that you're looking at is this, there's this frame around my dashboard now. And this frame represents the window of the device that you're looking at. So everything that's off this frame is not on screen. So you see that the most productive regions are actually off screen. So I'm going to do something here so that everything is on the screen. We want to make sure that the most productive regions are definitely seen. Does anybody here use automatic sizing? Okay, a few of you. Automatic sizing, this is a different name for it here in Device Designer, Fit All. It's our friend when we're designing for mobile. That'll allow the layouts to adjust to the screen size, even if you don't have the exact screen set. Okay, so does this look good for you, to you? Tablet layout look good to you? All right. So now what about the phone? So many execs are on their phone, so more than anything else, that I want to make sure that the dashboard looks good on the phone. So I'm going to go ahead, and now I'm going to add a phone layout in the same way that I did the tablet layout. Now look at our frame here. This is really off. This looks horrible. But never fear, Device Designer is here to help. And what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to say fit width instead of fit all for the phone. I'm going to go ahead and fit width. Okay, so it looks like we still have quite a bit of work to do, but we at least have the screen already. It will resize to different screen widths within the range that we have selected. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually move this zone under the map. Because this type, I don't know if you pay much attention to this, but on the phone, like we're usually scrolling vertically. I mean, of course, you all know this. Everybody's on their phone, so everybody knows this. Okay, so anyways, so what I'm doing here is I'm stacking the zones vertically so that they have more room to be seen. The next thing I'm going to do here is it's kind of crowded, so I'm going to make my screen height a lot higher than it was. 1200 may not quite be enough yet. I'm going to go for 1400. Okay, so now I'm going to resize my map so that it's still on screen. Notice this is the bottom of my screen. These guys look a bit tiny, so I'm going to resize that to make sure that people can read. I'm going to remove this. And, okay, so last thing I'm going to do is resize the title because it's being cut off here. So I'm going to double click and resize. I'm going to put 28. See what that looks like. Okay. So now I'm going to just increase the size of that zone a bit, and there we go. So we have the title on the screen. Our zones are fitting inside the width of the screen. We're done. So now, as if we were watching a cooking show, I am going to publish, and it's going to automatically go onto Tableau Online for you. There you go. Yeah. Optimal performance, right? Okay, so this is what your dashboard will look like on desktop. So to see in the similar way that Phil showed you the responsive layouts, we can do that here too. So I'm going to resize here, and you're going to see the tablet layout. You have to hit refresh for the tablet layout to actually show up when you're on the browser. And now I'm going to resize one more time and hit refresh. And there you have your phone layout. You can preview it on the computer once you have it published. All right, so now I'm going to hand it back over to Phil so he can explain how this works.
Okay, so let's delve into what we just saw there. So the key is, there are 5 things you need to know. The first one is, you saw that button that Carolina clicked. If you're not interested in designing for devices, you can ignore that button, and dashboard authoring works just as it always has, so you're not required to change your workflow at all. The other one that's very important is that you are designing a single dashboard, a single entity that is going to be adapted to change its appearance based on the screen size. But really, that's what we're designing. It's just one thing. You're not designing radically different content or a radically different dashboard. There's one default dashboard. It is the master. It kind of rules the content and other things like actions and formatting. So it's the master template, if you will, an important concept. The other one is that the adaptations are called device layouts. You saw those in the user interface. They were called desktop, tablet, and phone. I think you only saw tablet and phone in the demo. But in the responsive design, you saw these 3 canonical. So those are the variants or the adaptations that you design. Okay, 5th. But before I get into the 5th point, I kind of think here it's important to kind of go into some detail to talk about what that default is and what the device layouts and the relationship that they have. Our goal is really to arm you with fundamentals. If you understand these fundamentals when you approach this feature, you're going to be able to get up and running faster. And coupled with some good design best practices, you'll be a lot more successful. So we're going to take a little detour into the guts of this thing. So first, let's talk about the parent-child relationship. That's me there with my twin daughters, and they're a little younger. They'll be almost 5 at the end of November. We were in front of the full fuselage trainer. NASA used this to train shuttle astronauts in familiarization with the interior of the shuttle. They learned how to put spacesuits on in kind of cramped quarters. They learned how to evacuate the shuttle during a launch emergency, which NASA recently said was pretty much an impossibility. But it's good for people to believe. And this is actually in Seattle now. We got it from NASA Houston. It was donated to us in 2012. And I think I go there almost every month. All right. This is a dashboard. But not just any dashboard, it is a parent. It has content, viz is in it. Imagine it's a dashboard. Like any parent, it has children. It has 3 children. And like any child, all the children in the family, they're all a bit different. Some are tall and skinny. Some are kind of not so tall and skinny. They're different sizes. Like any child, they inherit DNA from a parent, but they express it differently. Some kid may look like that. Well, that child layout may just be a single viz, and the other ones may look differently. The content is scaled and proportioned differently. It could look like this also, but they're expressing the content of the parent. This is an important visual model to keep in mind when using Device Designer. What is the parent? We call the parent the default dashboard, the master. The device layouts are the children, the adaptations. So if you hold on to this model, when you approach Device Designer or you're teaching anyone in your organization how to use it, it's just going to make life easier. We struggled with the terminology for this. Sometimes you'll hear internally in my functional specification for this, and in the engineering docs, we called it the master and clone. We were going through a Star Wars phase. I think there was a dark week. Luckily, that didn't stick. And there was a dark week in which we called it Tyrell and replicants. And I think people pleaded with us to stop that. So, but anyway, it's the default and the device layouts. Okay, so that's the overarching model that you need to keep in your mind. So after that, we're going to switch to something else. We're going to talk about what you do with that model. But before that, I got another space mission patch. And Peggy Whitson logged more hours in space than any other American astronaut. That's 665 days in space. She came back just recently on a Soyuz capsule, and this is the mission patch that she had on her suit. I'll give it to anybody who can tell me what this is. You can get a pretty good guess because I'm not allowed to come home with these. So, anybody want to take a guess of what we're looking at here?
A simulator for landing the lunar module?
That's it. There you go. There you go. So the year is 1961. NASA develops for $2 million something called LOLA, Lunar Orbiting and Landing Approach. They hired artists to paint giant murals of the moon. And I don't know if there are any pilots in here. Anybody fly any aircraft? No. This is an aircraft yoke and rudder pedals and an aircraft cockpit. What NASA thought was that the workflow for landing on the moon would be similar to the workflow for landing on Earth. It turns out that they were way off on that, and it was nothing like that. So by the end of the 60s, they quietly scrapped the LOLA. But it's about workflow. So let's talk about workflow. So the first thing about the workflow is most important is the default. With Device Designer, the way it works, you have to start with the default dashboard. You need to create all your content in there. You cannot go and start designing for mobile first. You need to design for the default first. This is because it has to be one entity. We had to design it like this to preserve this notion of a single entity that you're modifying. So then, once you've defined that default dashboard, you can create the phone layout first. Just as a best practice, we think the most rigorous thing is to start with the phone. It's going to be the hardest. It has the most constraints. You don't want to shortchange people who are using the phone with functionality, so you should go there and see how you can adapt that default for the phone. Once you've done that, go ahead and define tablet and the desktop device layouts. So as a best practice, that's what we tell you to do. Once you're in the default, you can do some cool things, though, once this relationship is established. You can, for example, remove a viz from the default, and it'll remove it from its child device layouts. Similarly, you can format a viz in the default, and it'll format all the device layouts. You can resize, set the sizing behavior on the default, and of course, that'll change the device layouts. You can also, any actions you apply to the default, apply to the device layouts. So you see where this is going. So default is in control. It is a very kind of dominating parent. I don't know if that's a term, but it does a lot of things. It's really about the formatting. It's about actions. It controls the types of filters that are available. And so the idea here, another key concept you want when using this feature, start with default first. It's going to save you a lot of trouble, I think. Okay, so now I'll get into a little more detail because you're probably wondering, well, what good is that? I mean, if you're just expressing what the default is, then that doesn't really let me really create really adapted device layouts, does it, right? So with that, I say, wait, there's more. Anybody know who Ron Popeil is? Okay, there you go. So for those of you who don't know, he kind of hawked products, I think, from like the 70s through the 90s on like late night television, these weird infomercials. Probably the most interesting product was spray-on hair, which doesn't work. So I don't know how I would do that. So this is astronaut Ron Akiba. His parents are originally from Puerto Rico, and he is actually up on the space station right now. And you're seeing him from a mission, I think from 2008, when he came back to Earth. Occasionally the Russians will surprise you and have you sign the outside of the Soyuz capsule. So he's not defacing that capsule, he's just signing it as his name. So this is about customization. So let's take a look. So if you have this underlying model, what can you do so it's a little richer? The first thing you can do is something destructive. You can delete a layout that you've created. That gives you control, and you can say, I only want a desktop and a phone layout. In that case, if you're to do that, what happens is when somebody goes to server and requests this dashboard, and they happen to come with, say, a tablet, like any helicopter parent, default drops in and takes over. And it is the default dashboard that you see. So you can end up with an experience where the default is the thing that you see, and it may not be exactly optimized for the tablet, but that's what happens. For that reason, it is an option, we think, for maybe more advanced scenarios, but not one that we recommend. We actually think that as a best practice when using this feature, you should define all three layouts. And why? Because when you define all three layouts, there are kind of two things that you benefit from. One is the default dashboard disappears and no one ever sees it. If there are three layouts defined, when an end user comes to server, they never see the default. It becomes the scratch pad, like a room in your house where you put stuff, staging area. And it's very powerful because you can use it to create really customized layouts. The other thing is we think as a best practice, when you're starting out with this feature, you should be thoughtful and design all three, the entire experience, because you never know who's accessing these dashboards. Unless you're carefully looking at server logs, people are coming at these things with all kinds of devices. You need to be thorough and think about designing a complete experience, even if you're not investing in time. Some people even just put a page that says, don't use a tablet. Put a big text for them, because we haven't designed it yet. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions if you want. But yeah, this is the idea, right? So you want to define all three. So what does that mean? It means in the user interface, you'll see this. You'll see all three. And then also you'll have to click this custom button. That means when you click the custom button, what exactly happens there? If you're to click custom, for the phone, say, what you do is you sort of sever the connection with the parent. You're not completely severing, that's what the dotted line means, but it allows you to do some customization that is not normally possible. And what that entails is the following. If you were to do that, to click custom, you can go to the phone and remove a viz. And when you remove it, all the other layouts stay unchanged. You can also do something like resize the viz. You can reposition. You can do things like add a text object, a dashboard object. You can format that dashboard object. And you can add a filter that's not visible, that's defined in the default. And you can even change the style of the filter. You can also set a different sizing behavior like Carolina showed you, so that it's unconstrains the width, so the width can grow, but it's a certain height. So that's basically the extent of the customization. And the idea is that it doesn't impact the other device layouts. So the idea is that these are the various things you can do, like removing sheets and changing the sizing behaviors. And it is kind of a very powerful feature. But the idea, though, is a very important concept, is that you're still not creating a radically different version of the dashboard on the phone in this case. The default still remains in control. It controls the content. It still controls the formatting. It still controls actions. It controls what filters. We did that deliberately because we needed it to be a single entity. We envisioned you using this dashboard at the office on a large desktop, going on a tablet and seeing the same dashboard, and then going on a phone and seeing the same dashboard, filtering it, saving a custom view, and that view transferring across. And so we deliberately had this model with a controlling default. So in that sense, it never stops being apparent. Oh, by the way, that is the Space Shuttle carrier aircraft. And NASA, it was originally built for American Airlines, and NASA used it to haul the shuttle from Edwards Air Force Base, 1,100 miles to Kennedy Space Center. And it carries about 170,000 pounds. That's about 118 Asian elephants, not all on the same plane, or about 60 African elephants if you're into that sort of thing. So 4 things. So what's the 5th thing? This is really important. This is the one everybody gets wrong conceptually about responsive web design and device designer. You're not designing for a specific device. If half your team says they have an iPhone 7, you are not designing only for this device. You're designing for something else. And I'll talk about that. Why? This is a really famous tree map from the website OpenSignal from 2015. They measured all of the Android traffic to their site. Just Android devices discovered there were about 24,000 of them visiting just the OpenSignal site. And if you look at this advertisement from 2013, you'll see this kind of proliferation of spectrum of Samsung devices from very small phones to phablets to tablets, a continuum. It turns out that this is somewhat problematic because it's a problem called device fragmentation. And what it means is that someone like us, as software developers, we have a hard time detecting and reliably knowing the screen resolution in the device type. It can be a tricky way to do that. We would have to pass the burden of identifying that device to you. So we did something differently. So what was the solution? So the answer to all things is space. All right, okay, maybe not. Maybe it's, in this case, embeddable space. And embeddable space, well, what is that? Well, embeddable space is this. It's like, this is a phone, and then it's a dashboard, and the Viz toolbar, the little toolbar in the dashboard on the phone. And so if I rotate it, it kind of looks like that. So that's the embeddable space. It's the space allocated to us to show the dashboard. The Chrome, that's the lingo we use internally. It's the UI of the mobile browser or the app that's showing the dashboard. It reserves a certain amount of space. The embeddable is what's left over. That's why we actually monitor that space and not the device type. Sometimes the Chrome takes up a lot of space, and it may not be appropriate to show a tablet. Maybe a phone's better. So we try to look at how much space is available. The other option here is that if you do that, it's a much more flexible feature. So that means that if you had a blog and you had to embed something in it, well, we could look at the iframe, look at the amount of embeddable space and say, okay, this is the most appropriate view to display in there. So device designer is just not limited to devices. It's really embeddable space designer, but marketing didn't like that name. So, okay, so what is Tableau Server doing? When an end user comes to request a dashboard, what is it doing? Well, what it's doing is, and this gets a little arcane, but I think it's good for you to understand. What it's doing is it measures the height and the width of the embeddable space, and then it says, I'm going to take the smallest dimension, remember it, and store it right over here. If you had the phone rotated, the end user, when they requested that dashboard, server would go, okay, here's the height and width, I'm going to measure it, but the height is the smallest dimension. I'm going to remember that and save it. So it always looks for the smallest dimension. And then what it does, it says, okay, if the smallest dimension is greater than 800 pixels, then you are a desktop, and I'm going to give you the desktop device layout. If it's between 500 and 800, then you get the tablet. And less than equal to 500, you're going to get the phone layout. Yeah, we'll have some time at the end. We'll leave plenty of time for questions. But I want to make sure Carolina gets some time to get into the best practices. So that's basically all it's doing. That's what the detection logic is. It had to be simple in order, at least for this first version, so that an author would not sit there and have to pass a Mensa test to first use the feature. That's kind of the idea. So why is this important? Well, if you have a continuum of devices like monitors, desktops, laptops, phablets, why it matters is because we have to bucket these into 3. So you end up bucketing these things, and so everything gets grouped. So it's important to know this because if you have users who have certain small laptops, they may trick the server logic into thinking that they are a tablet. This is the kind of problem you'd face with a responsive website too. So it's good to understand that and good to be a little more aware. The feature does require you to have some awareness of these things when designing. One alternative, though, is the Tableau Mobile app. It actually just sort of bypasses the detection logic. It says, I'm a phone, I know I'm a phone, just give me the phone layout and don't do any of that funny stuff with mid-width and height. And so it always does that. You can get a better experience. But also it has some other benefits like mobile device management and single sign-on and favoriting and offline snapshots. And we would design Device Designer, really our internal goal was to optimize it for this app. So when you're getting started, I think if you can, try to use the mobile app as part of your solution with Device Designer. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Carolina, and she's going to go into the best practices.
All right, thank you, Phil. And now, bringing my computer back to life. All right. All right. Okay, how to design for mobile. So what I'm going to talk to you about is a couple of things. First, mobile is different. Then we're going to talk about the best practices that Phil was mentioning. And we're going to talk also about how you can get the most from Device Designer. Okay, so can anybody tell me what's going on here? What do you think they're doing? Pokemon, yeah, it's possible. Yes. Yeah, they're offline, absolutely. So they could be making important decisions at work, and what makes it very unique is that they're likely offline. They don't have connectivity. What about here? They might just be friends having coffee, or they could also be coming up with the next multi-million-dollar startup. So what we notice here is, there's small screens. There's a tablet, there's a phone. They don't really have their laptops on them. They also have a notebook. So 61.46% of internet use today comes from phones and tablets. And it's only going to go up. So we want our content, we want to help you make your content available where people are, to give them access anywhere. And here's someone who's just working at her desk, but notice how the phone is right next to her. So even if you have a computer that you're sitting at your office, you might have your phone next to you, and you're relying on that for the urgent things, for like the notifications, and that might not necessarily be something you notice on the desktop. Okay, so what did we see? We saw the offline access with spotty connectivity. We also looked at, we also noticed how they're on a small screen. There's less space. And they also use their fingers to interact there. And they need quick insights, right? Okay, so you're busy, and you're probably asking, what happens if I do nothing? So here's our trusty California wine production dashboard again. This is what it looked like on desktop in authoring. If you did nothing, this is what it would look like on server, on a laptop. And on tablet, it would look like this. It would look pretty good, right? Like the tablet is generally okay with a desktop layout, although you could make better use of the space here, right? You could fill the screen a little bit better if you had the fit all, if you had done that. But the phone, if you don't do anything to the phone, that's what it's going to look like. It's going to be really hard to read, really hard to touch anything on there. So This is why you need to arm yourself with best practices. So I'm going to show you some techniques that are going to make it easier for you to create great mobile dashboards. So as Phil mentioned, you're going to want to definitely customize the phone layout. The canonical view is the portrait view, although depending on your content, landscape might be good. So canonical is vertical scrolling, single column, and limiting your view to 2 to 4 main zones. If you have too much more, it becomes really difficult for people to parse the information if you have this infinitely scrolling dashboard, right? The other thing is you want to make sure that people get the answer to their question, like to the main question at the top, right? Like you want to give the most important information right at the top. Next thing you want to do, which you didn't actually see on the wine dashboard, is you want to be stingy with filters. So this is a bad example here, or sorry, where's my bad example? I had a bad example. Oh yes, so sorry, yes, it's just that it's very hard for me to see that I show you that. Okay, so there's a big list of filters here with very little actual content. So it makes it harder to really gain insight if you have a big long list of filters on the screen, right? So this is a good example. 2 filters at the top. The rest is all your visualization. So it's not, the filters aren't taking up too much space. This is a good general, framework for you. Like the title's at the top, a couple of filters, 3 maximum, and then your zones. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that each view fits on a screen so that people can see the entirety of your view in one screen. So here's the map. If you scrolled up, there was a little scatter plot that also fit on the screen. This was the biggest one, and it also fit on a screen. You have to balance that with also the number of marks you have, obviously, because you're not necessarily going to have everything that fits, but you kind of have to, it's kind of an art, balancing those things. Then the next thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that your tooltips are limited to 300 pixels wide. So now that we have Viz in Tooltips, which is available in the 10.5 beta, you're going to feel very compelled to maybe make very big tooltips, very wide tooltips. But know that on the phone, what we're going to do is we're going to automatically resize them to fit on the screen, and it's going to be really hard to read if they are so big. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about how this is going to look like on the phone. So we actually have a default size, actually, that's 300 pixels wide. It's going to start out like that. It's only if you change it that you would make it bigger. Okay, so that's the example there. So the next thing that you want to do is make sure that your marks are as big as possible. You don't have a lot of control over the size of a mark because it also depends on the data, right? But the other thing that you can do is go ahead in your marks card and increase size of marks because that makes it easier for people to touch them. So with touch interaction, this isn't a very fat finger, but fingers are much bigger than a cursor. So the minimum recommended size for a mark is like 18 pixels or 6 millimeters. And again, you don't have that level of control with the marks card. It's just a number for you to keep in mind. But the preferred is 45 pixels for a touch target. So the other thing is the space between marks, which you can't control in a scatter plot. And we actually are doing things so that you can help users disambiguate between different marks. But if you can control the height of a bar, for example, that's vertically stacked or that's horizontally laid out, you want to have like a 30 pixel distance between the center of each hit target area. That allows people to hit the right thing. Next thing is be cross-platform. Does anybody here know what web-safe fonts are? No? Nobody? Okay, so web-safe fonts are fonts that are available on all browsers. It doesn't matter which computer somebody's on, they're going to have these fonts. I wouldn't recommend that you use Comic Sans, Courier, or Impact. Those are not very professional, or they're not very legible, especially on smaller screens. I would stick with these, or with our special Tableau fonts, which are actually very carefully designed, and they're available for anybody who's using Tableau on server or on iOS. On Android, sometimes it'll replace with Roboto. So just something to keep in mind. And you can actually download these slides afterwards. You'll have access to all of this information, so you don't have to worry about taking pictures if you're trying to just make sure that you capture it. So the next thing you want to do is optimize for our gesture model. So this is also something that's getting a revamp in 10.5, and it's available in our beta. We've changed things a little bit so that when people land on a dashboard on their phones, when they swipe, all they're going to do is scroll. They're not going to be interacting with a mark. Sorry, let me go back up there so you can see that again. So if you swipe, you're going to scroll on the dashboard. This is different from what we had before. And if you press, if somebody touches on a mark, they're going to select that mark, and people are going to enter something that we call selection mode for that specific area. So what happens there is if people are dragging their fingers, they're going to either pan in that view, or they're going to drag and make a multi-selection. So that's the panning behavior. And previously, you were looking at the selection. The other thing that we do, that we support, because this is something everybody expects, is obviously pinch to zoom, especially on maps. Everybody expects that. And we're introducing a new gesture so that people can have the experience of hover tooltips on the phone or on a tablet. So if people long press and drag, you're going to have tooltips show up over the marks that your finger is dragging on. So what does that mean for you when you're designing? First thing is you want to limit scrolling sheets within scrolling dashboards. That's to reduce the scrolling within a scrolling dashboard. You want to reduce that as much as possible. The other thing that you want to do, if you can, if you don't have a lot of marks, is you'll want to disable panning and zooming on your map, because that adds an extra layer of complexity. Of course, in many cases, you'll have a lot of marks and you'll want to allow people to zoom, so don't do that. But if all of your data is in view and you don't need to pan, just lock that. Don't allow pan and zoom. So what did we talk about? Customizing the phone layout, touch interaction, and making your design compatible across platforms and the gesture model. Okay, now what are other things you can do that are specific to the tool you'll be using, which is Device Designer? Some other things. So as you saw in our demo, fit width for the phone will give you automatic flexible sizing. The next thing is you want to define the 3 layouts, as Phil mentioned. So just making sure that we reiterate that here. And then there's use the default as staging area, which Phil mentioned, right? So you could actually have a different version of a view on a phone than the one you have on desktop. You might want to customize it more than just the resizing of it. So you could have a duplicate, and you could use the special phone version for the phone layout and have the other version on desktop. It's a trick. It's a advanced trick. So, for example, what I did actually for that wine production viz was I had 2 versions of the precipitation history viz. One was horizontal, and the other one was vertical. I did that so that on the phone it would scroll vertically. So the other thing that you want to do is make sure that you check this box here, the Tableau mobile app. That will subtract for the Chrome on Tableau Mobile. This is if you're using the app. you're going to lose a little bit of space at the top. This isn't going to be an exact subtraction. You're going to actually lose a little bit more in Device Designer, but this is a good thing to do. And then you only get one orientation per device layout. So you want to choose wisely. You want to make sure that you know your content well and that it's meeting your needs, and lay it out for portrait or landscape. One last pro trick here is to turn off sheets as tabs when you publish. Tabs don't work so well on mobile, so you'll want to turn that off. And what people will be able to navigate between your sheets using a little sheet selector that we have in the native Chrome. Last but not least, test. Test, test. Ideally, look at your dashboard on real devices. Look at it on a phone. Look at it on a tablet once you publish it. And another thing you can do, which is a good QA skill to pick up here, Google Chrome has a web emulator. And the way you can use it is you go into the View menu and go to Developer Tools and turn that on. And when you do that, you're going to get a little window here that allows you to preview on different devices. So that's another good trick to pick up. You're not seeing the phone layout that we created yet, as you can notice. It's as if the refresh hadn't been hit. What you do is you actually add some extra text on the URL. And this is in the notes here for the slide, so you'll be able to take that with you. Basically, it's a little question mark and colon embed equals yes, and app banner equals false. So if you add that, you won't see any of that Chrome, and you'll be able to preview your device layout. So our tips were to fit with, or fit all if you're on the tablet. Make sure you define your 3 layouts. Use default as a staging area to get advanced special layouts for the phone. Subtract the app Chrome, and test, test, test. That's it. That's all we have for you today. So questions are more than welcome.
Yeah, there's a microphone there if you have some questions. There's one maybe you can line up and get behind the microphone. We're recording this, so it'd be great if you can actually line out. Wish there were more
Is this
microphones.
on? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So you mentioned how the app auto-detects that it's a phone or a tablet by design. Because the breakpoints are sort of like a threshold at the vertical level, a portrait level, does a landscape phone then auto-register as a tablet in the URL mode or an app mode? Because it doesn't hit the portrait phone yet, it's landscape, so where does that fall?
Oh, that's where the smallest dimension comes in.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll take the smallest dimension, and then so we account for that. And in that case, it would be the smallest dimension, so it would detect that it was a tablet. The trick, though, is that there might be some tablets that fall into a range where they're large.
Right.
And they might be a desktop. In Device Designer, you'll actually see that the iPad Pro we treat as a desktop device. It's so high resolution. But there are ways to tell the server that it should treat it as a tablet.
Okay, and then you mentioned the filters. When you, the only way to kind of not make that dependent on the default is to click that custom checkbox to change something exclusively for the phone. So you mentioned that a recommendation is to maybe remove some filters. So does that mean that every filter in default carries over, and maybe also parameters if you don't click custom? It goes on all of them?
It goes on all of them.
Okay.
So you have to remove them.
I
They
have
would
to click
appear.
custom to change the experience.
Yes, it's like
Singular.
cutting that connection.
Got it. Okay.
But you can change their style, their type.
Okay, so multi-select or like a radio button, that I can change without snipping the connection, without custom.
Super important because you may need a multi-select one on a
Yeah.
phone. It's going to be better for you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there only 3?
Great question. Only 3 for now because this is our first mobile authoring solution, but we commonly get the requests for multiple ones.
Okay. And
I've been
are the
talking to the team about potentially taking that detection logic, embedding it in the workbook so you can define as many as you want. But that means that you need to be more careful as an author because you might define one for a watch or for a large screen. The other caveat there is our large screen story, I think, is still an evolving one at Tableau. One thing that I think that would help this feature, and Tableau in general on mobile, is if our font's scaled. And so that if you had multiple ones and you created something for a large screen, the fonts, though, don't scale today. So that you actually have to put a different text content for a large screen in a phone. So I think for now, we may keep those device layouts until we get some of these other pieces ready as we continue development.
And the breakpoints are fixed, or is that something you can adjust the breakpoints?
In the appendix, I put some advanced material. There are ways to like change the breakpoints, but there's some caveats in it, and you can read them in the appendix. You can go into the YAML files on server and change them. We don't recommend doing that. I helped a customer recently doing that, but there are ways to do that.
Mars is
What is it? Pluto is a planet. It is if you're a planetary scientist, it's a planet. If you're an astronomer, it's not.
Hi, will the responsiveness work with Tableau Public?
Yes. Yes, it's Tableau Public. In that case, you saw me put that asteroid mining thing. Mm-hmm. That's a scenario. I should have just said Tableau Public. But you're embedding, so it uses a detection logic. And then if you were just embedding it on your blog, you can use this query string parameter. It says, I always want tablet here. Bypass the detection logic. Just show. But on Tableau, on Public, yeah, that's how that works. So it uses the detection logic and shows one of the views.
Great, thanks.
So when you choose a device layout, say a phone, I think I remember correctly, there's like default phone and then a bunch of different options.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason you can't just choose default for both phone, tablet, and desktop? Like, do you have to define it for every single type of phone?
No, those are just screen sizes, actually.
Yeah.
I think the reason that was done is so that people have a mental model of what a device would be like of that size, but just focus on the dimensions, because it's not for that specific phone. As Phil mentioned, it's just the screen size, it's the space.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if I pick default for all three devices, I'm fine.
You can, you don't need to use Device Designer. You can do everything in default. If you don't care to create a custom experience with all these adapted layouts. That's what a lot of people were doing traditionally. Before the feature, you would just use and create a dashboard for mobile, and there are sizes for that. So you don't have to use it.
Okay, and then with the phone, do you recommend trying to build in some white space between like your different views so that, because you're doing everything with your finger like you were showing, and I know some of the people, when we first published them, everything is like so tight and close together that they were accidentally clicking on the wrong thing, or like, are there any best practices for that?
You don't have to put space in between, but it depends. If it's looking like, people are going to expect that they go from one thing to the next like seamlessly, then you might want to have a little bit of padding. It depends on the viz. It depends on the dashboard. You don't have to. I mean, there's usually a little title, or there's the axis has a little bit of room. There's a little bit of white space. Sometimes it's built into the viz itself. But you don't have to. You don't have to have space. Yeah.
Yeah, less so now with the new gesture model.
Yeah, exactly. That's.
Yeah,
Before there was a lot of problems. 10.5, yes. It's in beta
beta.
right now.
Oh, next question.
Can you force the layout from on one device to another? Let's say I have a web page and I want to force it to show the phone layout.
Oh, yeah.
Can I do that?
Sure. There's a query string parameter that you add to the URL. It says device equals, say phone, tablet, or desktop.
Okay.
And you force it that way.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. And it's in the appendix. So if you look in the appendix in the slide deck, you'll see all of this and some more advanced stuff.
Hi, I'm an engineer. I have a little bit technical question to ask. So is there a performance difference for the version of the Tableau, for the version of the charts we get from, like, with phone and desktop and tablet?
Yes, there is a performance. This is a great topic. We didn't get into this just from the time. So it turns out that one compromise you need to make is that if you turn on automatic sizing like we recommend, because we think it adapts better, Currently, the trade-off is, imagine this entire room, everybody here has the iPhone 7, right? You all have the same phone. So when I'm Tableau server, you request that dashboard for me, I give it to you, but then luckily, because I'm lazy and I'm Tableau server, I can cache that layout where I've computed all the geometry, it's all nice and organized, and I can just serve everybody who requests it the same layout without having to do all the math to figure out the different sizes. When you turn on automatic sizing, imagine you have a variety of different phones and tablets and desktop sizes. Then I'm Tableau server and I can't be lazy and I need to figure out the geometry for every single thing and I'm constantly recomputing so that there's more of a performance impact. So when you're designing for mobile, you have to know something about your environment and make a deliberate trade-off about, yes, there may be a performance impact in load time. It may add some milliseconds or maybe a second or two, but I need to think about that. So that's something where you need to test and think about making that trade-off. Yeah, for sure. We think in the future, though, we're making some investments that put more of the computation into the client. And so that means that it'll be much faster and you'll see less impact. But it's definitely something to consider today. Even with a responsive website, similar caching issues appear.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have a question too? You were gonna.
Was there any one more question?
I was going to ask, how do actions flow down, and can you, when you customize, can you take actions off of the mobile version if you have it on the default version?
No, the actions flow down. They definitely are one of the constants. So that was part of this idea of like, when we started off, we did a lot of research and a lot of customers needed it to be the same dashboard. They needed to preserve it, so they all flow down. There's no way to like turn them off. The alternate model we heard from customers, I want these things to be really different. Some of our consultants in the field are like, I need the phone to be a crazy different thing. And I'm like, we didn't design it to do that. We're talking about how to, especially Carolina, she's running a focus group or a lab study to figure out, yeah, what if we break the connection and you just go to town and make totally different things and the actions are not there.
Yeah, if you're interested, you should stop by the labs and sign up for one of those sessions.
Oh, these are great questions. All right, so, oh, you know what? Let me just switch here because we're on the,
Oh yeah, we're on the.
and, well, so that's it for us here. We have some repeat sessions. I'm trying to get to them here. But we're repeating this session tomorrow. And also, we have some recommended sessions here. I think we were supposed to use this laptop for the presentation.
Yeah, for the end.
And let me see here. So this is us. You can find us. If you need to reach out to me, you can get my like Twitter handle here. You can contact me through the app, or just stop by and I'll give you a business card if you have any questions. Here are our repeat session tomorrow, if you want to send anyone to it. Tomorrow, and these are other sessions we think you'd find valuable about customizing smart defaults. It's a research session with Carolina. There's some stuff on seamless mobile workflows that'll teach you how to like do device management and organization. And then another session is really about deploying at scale, and I think that's a really important session. So I think it'll really, with this, some good bookends from design to like deployment. You'll get really good education, I think. And with that, just we'd ask you to complete the survey in the app. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for being such a great audience.
Thank you.